Okay, seeing that it's a couple minutes after, welcome in everyone. My name is Karen Howard. I'm a consultant for the Build Initiative, and we're thrilled that you have joined this meeting. Last year, as you know, we previewed the Michigan Nonprofit Relief Fund, and at that time we had Nellie Tsai from the Michigan Nonprofit Association come and talk to us about the opportunity. And it was really a chance for you to talk with Nellie about how the M&A could structure this grant so that it was equitable and so that it really reaches the smaller nonprofits that have been impacted by the pandemic. Well, Nellie and M&A and Leo, the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, really listened to that advice. The grant is now live, as you know. And so today is really your opportunity, Nellie's opportunity really to talk to us about that and walk through the grant application. But it's really your opportunity to ask questions about the grant, the application, about the administration of the grant. And it's also the opportunity for the Build Initiative to talk about some of the technical assistance that we are providing around the grant. And so we are thrilled that you have joined. We want to go through just a little bit of housekeeping. We have made this meeting from a webinar to a meeting so it can be interactive. Nellie will go through the application and there'll be an opportunity for you to come off of mute and ask questions. And if you don't want to ask live questions, if you'd rather put it in the chat, you may do that. My colleague, Jennifer Jennings Schaefer, will be monitoring the chat and will be highlighting some of the questions and key comments that are in the chat. So if you would raise your hand when that comes up and we can have you come off of mute. Next slide, please. So we want to tell you a little bit about the Build Initiative. It has been in operation for well over 20 years. It is a national nonprofit. And the mission of Build is to bring about a time when race, ethnicity, gender, zip code, immigration status, and language no longer determine children's outcomes and outcomes of families. It does this by working with state leaders to create policies and infrastructure and systems that are equitable. It also works to embed racial equity and inclusion in state systems. The Build Initiative is also the capacity builder technical assistance to the Pritzker Children's Initiative, coalitions in 20 states and 10 communities, really looking to ground prenatal to 3 policies and embed policies and practices that are equitable. Build also, with the support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, has been assisting Michigan nonprofits in Battle Creek, Detroit, and Grand Rapids to access pandemic funding. It's our goal that the pandemic funding get to and in the places where it's most needed in Michigan. Next slide, please. So just to go over some of the supports that the Build Initiative has been providing to Michigan nonprofits, hosting webinars like this, where we see opportunities to capture and to obtain grant funding related to the pandemic, researching and highlighting funding opportunities, providing support with applications and grant writing, and connecting organizations to the supports that they need in providing advocacy supports. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later as when we get to assistance that Build will be providing with respect to this grant opportunity. Next slide. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we'll go through the Michigan Nonprofit Relief Fund. We are so thrilled that Nellie Tsai from the Michigan Nonprofit Association is here to go through the application, the documentation needed to answer all of your questions and to talk about the technical assistance that they are providing. She'll also preview the Michigan Impact Grant. That is a grant being administered by Leo. It is a grant for larger nonprofits, so if some of them are on this call, you'll know, and it is to lift Michiganders out of poverty. She'll talk a little bit more about that, and we will be looking into that grant and providing you with information and assistance as well. And then finally, we want to provide information about the technical assistance that we are prepared to provide to nonprofits in Battle Creek, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. Next slide. So it's my pleasure to welcome Nellie Tsai. She is no stranger. She has been a champion for nonprofits. She has expertise in community engagement, nonprofit engagement. We will drop her bio in the chat, or a link to her bio in the chat, because we want to tell you about her, but we want to really get to her presentation today. So Nellie, would you please take it away?
Thank you so much for the very kind and generous introduction. And I hope to join you all on screen in a few minutes. So great. If you can go to the next slide, that would be wonderful. So I just have a really, like maybe 4 or 5 slides prepared today to talk a little bit broadly about the Nonprofit Relief Fund, a little bit about M&A if you're not familiar with our organization, before I go ahead and share my screen and walk through the application itself on our application platform, which is SurveyMonkey. I will also acknowledge that you might be hearing some background noise, as one of the pivots that our family has made, and also as an organization, we no longer have a Detroit office. So one of the pivots our family has made is to there's opportunities here in the city to co-work and be at a daycare. So I am co-working at a daycare alongside our youngest. So you're going to hear some background noise as folks settle in for nap time. Please go to the next slide. I'm just acknowledging that. You're very loud today, which is fine. So M&A, if you're not familiar with the organization, we are a statewide membership association dedicated to nonprofit leaders such as yourself, and really thinking about what are the different ways that we can continue to amplify the great work that all of our nonprofit leaders are doing across the state. We do that primarily through advocacy. We do some training, capacity building, and providing lots of resources that can really help you deliver on the missions that you're doing, whether it's serving kids, serving animals, providing much needed frontline services, all of those things. We're really thinking about the general operating environment that you're in and how can we best help you be more efficient and effective at the work that you're doing. Please go to the next slide. So that's part of the reason why we were able, and we started advocating for this relief fund dedicated to nonprofits right at the start of the pandemic, nearly 3 years ago. And I know it's great because the baby here is almost 3, was really around this idea that, you know, nonprofits are being asked to do so much right now. Many of us were considered frontline workers, continuing to show up in these spaces where your kids were at home, workplaces were shut down, and just trying to navigate all of this. So we were doing more with less. And while the federal government at the time was great at providing much needed assistance to small businesses, the economy, it wasn't always dedicated specifically for nonprofits, even though nonprofits were very much eligible for those. It often felt nebulous for nonprofits to understand, like, oh, I could be applying for this, or I qualify for that, or getting that assistance specifically for nonprofits. So when the opportunity came around 2 years ago, we really thought about, okay, how can we advocate and make sure that we are supporting nonprofits here in our state? So we were successful after a 2-year campaign of working with different representatives across the state, legislators on both parties, to get dedicated relief funding for nonprofits here. And like Karen mentioned, we are administering about a $50 million pot of money with the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity to continue to provide much needed relief to the nonprofits that you all work for. I'm here today to talk specifically about the 32.5 roughly relief fund to small nonprofits. I'll walk you through the process. This is the one that M&A is administering, really thinking about how can we get general operating funds to nonprofits. Leo is administering a larger grant sizes targeted towards larger nonprofits. That's what I'm trying to say. They're calling it an impact grant. They're offering, I believe they have a relief request for information out right now with a full RFP coming in the next month, sometime in mid-May, I understand. So I can definitely talk to that later. So those are the 2 opportunities here. Noting that organizations may only be awarded one of the 2. You can't be awarded both. Next slide, great. So in terms of the relief fund, before we get into the application itself, I just wanted to break down what we're considering for eligibility, documentation, and what kind of financial information we're asking for. Also, like Karen mentioned at the start of this conversation, we spent a lot of time talking to different nonprofit leaders before getting even into the application process of designing the application. And we've been co-creating this alongside 2 different bodies of leaders across the state of Michigan. We've had a group of about 20 leaders help go through a participatory grant making process with us in designing the application, thinking about if this is the goal of the application, of the relief funding, of ARPA, of LEO, how can we break that down into manageable ways for nonprofit leaders to fill out? What are some questions that we want to know about nonprofits so that we can continue to support them? And what are ways that we can build in some trust-based philanthropy practices here? We also have a group of about 90 nonprofit leaders across the state of Michigan who have been generously giving their time and leadership in informing this process as well, but also agreeing to review the applications so that there's place-based peer reviews for all the applications, that it's not top down from M&A. But also the next slide, which you don't have to go to yet, we'll also talk a little bit more about what happens after you get that funding, how we're going to try to convene peer learning circles with these leaders to really build that ecosystem of nonprofits here. We really want this to be community-driven, member-driven, and hearing from the different needs of nonprofits across the state. I actually see a few of our regional hub members, as we're calling them, on the call today. So thank you so much. It's nice to see your faces here too. So let's get into it. To be eligible for the relief fund, you see it right here. You have to be a 501c3 or 501c19. Those are some veteran organizations, or fiscally sponsored by them. We are asking that you can demonstrate that you have been in operations prior to January 1st, 2019, providing services to Michiganders prior to January 1st, 2019. That your documentation, that's the narrative that you're telling, can talk to some of the financial hardships that you faced since March 3rd, 2021. Again, this is really related to the public health emergency of the pandemic, and why that date is there is because a lot of the benefits or financial opportunities available prior to March 3rd, 2021 was covered by the CARES Act. I don't know if you recall, there was 2 pieces of legislation in terms of funding available to folks. One was the CARES Act, and our funding comes from ARPA, which starts after that date, which is why there's March 3rd, 2021. We ask that nonprofits be serving Michiganders, and that we're really prioritizing small nonprofits, so those with a current annual budget of less than $1 million. So if you check all of those things, fantastic. Please, in terms of documentation, and one of the key points that we want to emphasize is if you want to gather your information up first, it'll make the application much easier. So for documentation, we're asking that you have your proof of your nonprofit status. And that can come from a variety of forms. But you need to prove that you're a 501c3 or 501c19, or your fiscal sponsor is. Your federal tax identification number or your EIN, you need to have that for your organization, or that EIN for your fiscal sponsor, W-9 tax form for yourself or your fiscal sponsor if you're using a fiscal. And then if you are using a fiscal sponsor agreement, that fiscal sponsor agreement itself, like the MOU, whatever agreement you might have with your fiscal sponsor. I wonder how many more times I can say fiscal sponsor, maybe more. In terms of finances, we are asking you to provide your 990N, easy, or whatever 990 form you're filing that is, representative of your organization's size and scope for the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. If for some reason, and I'll show it to you on the screen itself, if for some reason you don't have you're missing a 990 for one of those years, then there's an opportunity to fill in your revenue expenses on a table that we have in SurveyMonkey itself. And then you'll get there's a section in the application to upload any supporting documentation of your financial hardship. Those last 2 pieces, additional info and the optional supporting documentation, those are really That's only if you don't have any of those 990 forms uploaded for any of those 3 years. If you have your 990N for 2019, 2020, 2021, and you uploaded it correctly, you don't have to fill out this table, and you don't have to have any optional financial documentation. Cool. And then in terms of the timeline, if you can go to the next slide, please. Cool. So our timeline here, and I know it's not February anymore, but just the whole scope of the work that we've done. We had an intent to apply that started earlier this year, but note that you don't have to have filled out your intent to apply to fill out the actual application that's open right now. Our application opened late in March. And right now during the month of April, we're doing webinars like this one, but we're also hosting a suite of office hours, drop-in office hours where applicants can come in, talk to myself, our project coordinators, other hub members, and get your answers, get your questions answered. Again, our goal is to give out all this money. We want to make sure that you feel like you have enough information to fill out this application, get us check so that we can check all the boxes and just make it really easy for us to say, yes, we do not want to keep any of this money. Our goal is to give it all to the nonprofits who need it. Our RFP is closing, our application is closing on May 5th. And then during the months of May, June, and July, we'll be reviewing applications, making sure we have all of your documentation, looking at the entire application universe to make sure that our final recommendations are representative of the size, of the scope, of the diversity, of the regions of Michigan, et cetera. Once you have been awarded funding, you'll need to register if you haven't been registered yet, and that's one of the questions we do ask in the application, to register with the state of Michigan's Sigma system. You'll get a payment directly from the state of Michigan, not from M&A. So that's why we're going to ask you to register if you don't have a Sigma number. And then from the July through the end of the calendar year, you'll be invited to participate in peer learning circles and be provided capacity building resources for you in your place-based resources. So that way we can continue to foster and build the nonprofit ecosystem across the state of Michigan. Because we really believe in strengthening nonprofits. We know that a one-time infusion of money is great, but also ongoing engagement, providing spaces to network, have conversations, learning from each other, would also be really powerful. So we hope you choose to engage with us throughout the process this year. And I think, yep. So this is a perfect segue. Thank you so much for that. So I didn't even have to say next slide. So that website right here is mynonprofitrelease.org. That's where I'm going to share my screen, take you to in a second or two. Oh, there you go. Let's start that process. Let me make sure I'm going to share the right screen. I think that's my browser. Okay, great. You're looking at my screen. It's towards the Zoom meeting, right? Because that was the last thing I opened here, which is totally fine. Nope. Here it is. So this is what happens. This is the website that'll take you to when you click on mynonprofitrelease.org. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you get to the link that says fill out the application. That's the link you're going to click to get to the application. I've already clicked that link, as you can see from all the different tabs I have open. So I'll just take you here right now. Are you still following along with me? Yeah. Cool. So all applications are here. You're looking at my screen. I started an applicant. This is what it will look like if you were an applicant view. I'm going to move a few of these bars around so I can see this better. All right, I'm going to hide your faces so I'm not going to see any questions for your expressions anymore. I do apologize. Cool. So if you click on the application, this is the home page that you will see. It talks a little bit more about the opportunity itself, how you can use that grant funding, the process here. There's a link here highlighted in blue that I'll draw you. There we go. If you need to see a PDF of the application, you can definitely look at that link as well, so you can see the full scope of questions and a little bit more about the timeline. The eligibility we talked about in the slideshow, so I will skip over that. And also, we also talked about the documents that you'll need to gather. So the proof of nonprofit status, and here it actually specifies what that could look like. So it's one of these documents, not all of them. Your ID, all of these things we've talked about, great. We also talked a little bit more about the timeline, so you can see that here too. And I did want to draw your attention here. This is some of the key terms, if you're not familiar, that we'll use throughout the application. So it defines what Alice is, BIPOC, expenditures, all these different acronyms that you might find yourself looking at. And then the last thing here is also the scoring rubric, really helping you understand how your applications will be scored and weighed and which areas will get you points in the application. When we were designing this process, when we were thinking about this process, we want to be really transparent with everyone, making sure that everyone understood what pieces of the application we're looking at and why we're asking these questions, so that way you can really think about how to spend your time and energy. So we do ask about qualified census tracts. We'll ask you about if you serve communities that fall within or below ALICE population thresholds. You'll get scored against some of your leadership questions, mostly because we want to make sure M&A has a strong commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So scoring and just thinking about how we can continue to uplift some of those stories. But please know that we are also looking at this holistically. We're not going to ding you if you don't have any of these attributes, but we do want to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable. Then we talk a little bit more about scoring against the financial challenges, and then how we are going to be looking at the narratives that you provide. So again, this is just an overview of the application itself, and the scoring rubric is something that I did want to draw your attention to. So I have started my application before. So I'm going to click on see my application. So this is for Nellie's org. This is my application here. You can see there's about, they call them tasks. Some of them are more, some of them are just checklists, and some of them actually require some information. So I'm going to show you here that if you ever want to go back to that front page, I just walk you through that opportunity page that talks you through the acronyms, the scoring rubric. You can just hit pages up here. And I'll take you back to the application guidelines if you ever want to just have that frame of reference. If you also feel like you want to open your application up to someone else on your team to collaborate on it with you, you can add someone here on the screen button. And then both of you, all of you, will be able to get into this application and fill in the answers together. You'll see here that some of the green marks right here, it'll show you when a section is full, completed, and which sections are not. The last two sections here, demographics and optional documentation, both are optional. So I'll just note that here. So I completed the section. So what does that mean? That means that I filled out all the answers, and at the bottom of the page, I had hit complete. But if for some reason you haven't submitted your application yet, you can still come back and edit completed sections. So even if they have the check mark here, it's not set in stone until you hit submit. Once you do hit submit, you cannot edit your application. But because I haven't submitted my application yet, even though this is a green check mark, I can go here and I can go to edit. So now it's reopened, and I can go back in and go, oh, I really want to change my answer. I want to change my answer for some reason, just for demonstration purposes. So again, the first question is really making sure that you understand if you're eligible for this, if you've been in existence before January 1st, if you're registered for SGMA or not. Again, that's the state of Michigan vendor service. You don't have to be. But we are asking this question so we can understand how we might support you at that point, understanding how many of our grantees or final grantees still need to be registered and how we can make that happen for you. We are also asking that all nonprofits be in compliance with all state regulations for nonprofits, not just for this grant, but for all nonprofits. And one of the compliance in terms of being in good standing in the state of Michigan is to be registered to solicit funding. And that's done through the Michigan Attorney General's Office, their charitable trust division. And if you're not familiar with this process, registration is typically required for 501c3s and C19s that solicit or receive contributions in excess of $25,000 a year. And because, again, through our focus groups that we did earlier this year, we know that we wanted to let nonprofits self-select how much funding they request based on the financial hardships that you experienced during the pandemic. You can choose funding 5, 10, 25,000. We don't have a formula for you. So if you're a nonprofit asking for $25,000 and you haven't registered with the Attorney General's office before, you might have to as a result of this. So we want you to know that. So if your organization is registered to solicit in the state of Michigan, fantastic, you hit yes. You can also hit no. Again, we're not penalizing you. We just want to understand how we can support you. We also know that the AG's office has around a 30 to 40 day turnaround here to get folks registered to solicit. And that's fine. We have been talking to them, and if you fill out your registration form or your file for exemption from registering because you don't meet their thresholds, if you send that to them via email, which is their preferred way, FYI, they'll send you back an email receipt that says your registration is pending, and we will accept and take that pending status. And the last thing on this page is really understanding that there's multiple sections. So you can hit save and continue editing, which means, okay, I might come back to here. Or what I did before when we first opened the screen was that I had hit mark as complete because I didn't think I'd changed any of these questions again. But I might, who knows? Maybe for tomorrow's webinar, mark as complete. So now you see that green square or a circle. And the square comes up. A little repetitive, but it helps in terms of how the data is downloaded for our end. So we're asking again, if you are 501c3, are you going to use a fiscal sponsor? Asking if you are based in Michigan. Again, a whole bunch of yes, no questions. If you want to supply additional narrative, feel free to do so. We want to make sure that your beneficiaries are here in Michigan. We're also curious if you're a member of M&A, but it's not a requirement and you won't be penalized for this and you won't receive points for this. But we do want to know if you are a membership of M&A. Making sure that your organization matches your tax ID number, if you have a different doing business name. So a lot of just contact information on this first page. Then we get to the qualified census tracts here. One of the reasons we are asking is because part of the funding from ARPA talks about populations who have been impacted and disproportionately impacted by the public health crises. And one of the measures, one of the ways that they think about disproportionately impacted populations is through qualified census tracts. We know that because of a whole bunch of different systemic failures and all sorts of reasons, we don't have to get into that here. So we do ask if you serve or are located in qualified census tracts, and we can, excuse me, talk about that. We'll link here, excuse me for 1 second. The link here takes you to the HUD website. So that is a federal website here. It talks to you about QCTs and why that's important. And then one of my faults, here it is. For if you don't know your QCT, if you don't know if your organization is located in one, you can go to the HUD website and it'll walk you through the process of finding it here. Oh, we're also asking about talent. ALICE is an acronym for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And it is an initiative of the various United Ways across the state of Michigan, also nationally, to really draw attention to ALICE populations. So we know at a federal level, there's federal poverty levels for different regions of our state, and ALICE is the level right above it, where folks are just making enough money so they don't qualify for a lot of these assistance that's available, but not making enough money. So one of the purposes and one of the reasons that we are working so closely with the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department at Michigan, at the state of Michigan, is because we have shared goals of thinking that how might we continue to work to uplift and really address this idea of ALICE, that you can do all these things and still not have enough. So we're asking you if your organization serves folks who fall within or below ALICE thresholds. So I want to be very specific here, is that not just ALICE thresholds here, it's ALICE and below. So if you're below ALICE, that means you're at the federal poverty levels. This link takes you to the United for ALICE link, which is again with the United Ways. And if you're not familiar with ALICE, you can go, and if you click on that link, you can go to county profiles here. It is as of 2019. You can choose a county. Right now it's set to Wayne, since I am here in Wayne County. And you can look and see what does it mean to be considered an ALICE household in the state of, in the county of Wayne. The numbers, the percentages, and we'll take a percentage. We just want to know like the percentage of how many folks you think you serve that fall within ALICE and below. And if you click on it, it'll give you a census of that. Oh, it sets the budget right now. If for some reason you do know your annual budgets of the populations you're serving, is anyone that falls under this annual total number? And here are different ways that you can think about the budget sizes if you really want to get granular. But really, we're just asking for a percentage. Yep. And then if you have specific information, like if you do collect that household data, you have an opportunity to share that here and talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing with ALICE populations and below. We also want to know more broadly, what type of work does your nonprofit do? What kind of subsector work are you doing? And then describe the services to your organizations that your organization is providing. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. I'll take some questions before I move to the next section.
Hello, Nellie.
Hi.
Hey, good afternoon. Eric Foster, Rendy Progress Capital. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for all you're doing with respect to this webinar. Two questions, if I may.
Sure thing.
Great. Thank you. One is I could discern that I would be interested in looking at the Leo version just by virtue of your introductory deck. I would have us not applicable to the nonprofit relief fund by virtue of, I think, your asset revenue category, but nonetheless, maybe some questions are still applicable. First, will you have a similar primer on the Leo separate grant, or could you perhaps briefly take us back to the screen or provide the contact and informational info on that? And secondly, maybe this applies to that as well. On your financial hardship category, I am assuming you'd be looking at a particular maybe net operating loss of a particular year and quarter through 2019 to was it 22, or is that correct as an objective? criteria when you're asking for the financials? Is this program looking for an NOL, or is just some of the narrative, objective financial hardship case?
Hi, let me share my screen and I can talk about the Leo Impact Grant really briefly, and then I can get to your second question, which was around the documenting financial hardships. Does that sound okay with you?
Copy that.
Are you looking at a screen with
Yes.
Yes.
So this is the link to the Leo, their opportunities for Michigan nonprofit organizations. They talked a little bit about the Relief Fund, which is what we were talking about today. But when you think about the Impact Grant, all the information that's available about the Impact Grant is also right here. So it's $15 million pot that they are allocating to larger nonprofits. They are also focused on ALICE populations and ALICE thresholds here. Large nonprofits could receive a one-time grant of up to $2 million from August 2023 to August 2025 to continue or expand their services. So this is very much a programmatic grant. So I do want to draw your attention to that difference. Whereas the Relief Fund is general operating funds, there is some programming tied to the Impact Grant itself. If you, to be eligible, you have to be a 501c3 or fiscally sponsored by one. There's an email address here that you can definitely email. But right now they're also in an information gathering phase of the program, of the process. So they have RFIs out. They want to understand the potential applicant pool of the Impact Grant. So that's what they're fielding right now. There's about 90s left to get that into them. So if you want to learn more about the Impact Grant itself, I would look at the full RFI, look at the types of questions they're asking nonprofits to get a sense of the scale and the type of work that they're expecting.
Nellie, if I can just interject,
Yeah.
there is a webinar on
Yeah.
Tuesday, the 18th.
Yep.
And we'll put that link in. It's probably, Nellie, where you were going anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. We do have, we are doing a joint webinar next Tuesday from about 11 to 12, as I remember, where we're going to talk a little bit more with Kim Trent, the head of the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department, as well as Kelly Kuhn, our M&A's president and CEO, to talk a little bit about the differences between the two funding. And then it's my understanding that they'll largely talk about the broad strokes of the funding opportunity available. I don't think they're going to have their RFP ready until next month, but I could be wrong about that piece. I think the best way for you to stay alerted about the Impact Grant is if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, sign up for email alerts. They'll send stuff directly to your inbox, especially when the application itself opens. I see hands up. Well,
yes, and we also have a couple questions in the chat
okay, great.
once you're ready. So I'll jump in with those real quick. And I think Lisa put a couple questions in the chat, so she may want to expand on what she put there, but she had asked what organization would be placed in the organization name when an organization has a fiscal sponsor. She also requested if you could demonstrate how to look at and document the ALICE response for a particular area, and a question regarding how you would document the qualified census tract response. So if there is a form. And Lisa, please feel free to jump on if there's more you wanted to add or clarify.
Sure, thank you so much. Good afternoon. The question regarding how to respond to the organization name for the question was a little confusing because it was qualified by the fact that it must match the ID, the federal ID number. And if you are utilizing a fiduciary, right, you wouldn't necessarily have that number. So in that space, would you put the organization applying or the fiscal sponsor's name? And then the follow-up to that is, if you were going to put the fiscal sponsor's name, do you then use the doing business as section to list the actual organization applying?
Okay. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Hey, Nellie, how are you? It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Part of the reason I'm not on screen is that pandemic baby is sleeping on my lap right now, and I need to put her in her cot, but I'm not doing that at the moment.
I cannot believe the baby is 3 years old. That is crazy. Okay.
Quite admirable.
Right, it is, right? And that is
Mhm.
full.
So your question is around the fiscal sponsor.
Yeah, and how to respond to the first question around, organizational name, right? Is that where you put the organization applying, who may not have a federal ID number, or is that where you put the fiscal sponsor and then you place the organization applying under the doing business as? So like, I'm not seeing a place that it makes sense to actually document the actual organization applying versus the fiscal sponsor.
Great. If you, let me figure out how to, sorry, just figure out my hand here. Okay. If you are using a fiscal sponsor, so I'm also on one screen right now instead of two, which is such a first world problem, right? Cool. So if I'm understanding correctly, we are on the screen about nonprofit information. We scroll down, and you are asking organization's name,
Yes.
if it matches the federal ID number, right? This is your organization's name. And if you don't have a federal ID number, you skip that part. Because at the bottom, if you keep scrolling down, we are asking if you're using a fiscal sponsor, please provide your fiscal sponsor's name here. And then if you're using a fiscal sponsor, their EIN goes right here.
Okay, that clears that up, because it was unclear to me if you could put an organization that did not have a federal ID number. So thank you for clearing that up.
Absolutely. I just didn't scroll far enough down for you, and I do apologize.
No, that part was clear. Just wasn't clear about that one section.
Okay.
Also, I think a low hanging one for me is like, what is the form that you want to document the qualified census tract? Do you put the county number? Do you put the county name? Or does it matter? You guys are gonna, I don't know how much of this is gonna be kind of calculated through an algorithm or something, or whether folks are gonna actually look at this, because it's not clear what form that folks should actually document that in.
Great. If you go to the HUD screen in the HUD user, you can choose counties, and then if you click down, and you can even find, which of course I can't find at the moment. You can get into which tracts and pull it up. There's a space for you to enter in your address, and it'll tell you which census tracts specific those numbers that you can say yes or no to, and enter in that census tract specifically.
So that would be a number that's in that field.
Yes.
Okay.
That is a great question, and I'll make sure that's added to our FAQ. Excuse me for 1 second. She did not know what to answer. Yeah.
Millie, we have some other questions, and Lisa, hi Lisa, I think you had questions about how to demonstrate how to look at and document the Alice response.
Correct.
Yeah, and I don't know if others have that yet, or whether we've gotten to that section. There's a few other questions, but if that one is that something you can answer now, or is that coming up a little bit later on a screen?
We can definitely talk about it right now. Let me make sure that I am sharing again. County profiles. Here we go.
And while you're looking at that, there is if the fiduciary has been operating since January 1, 2020, 2019, but the actual organization applying started after that, are they eligible?
And I will note, I think related, I didn't see this in the chat, but this has come up previously, the question being, you know, sort of in what capacity they might have been operating. Like, I think a related question has been organizations who may have been operating previous to that date, but that didn't have their 501c3 status. So I think there are perhaps several questions relevant to what does it really mean? What is the requirement regarding when operations started?
Our requirement for operating, and I hope this answers the questions because there's a few different scenarios that I'm hearing right now, is that your nonprofit, whoever is the, and not your fiscal sponsor, but you, your organization, your have to have been providing services prior to 2019. And if you weren't a 501c3, and we get that it's the case for many organizations that you get your 501c3 later, or you're working with a fiscal sponsor who, after you started your project, who might have only gotten their 501c3 recently, because we've seen that come up a few times as well. As long as you're able to document that you were providing services prior to 2019, we will accept and look and review your application. So that optional documentation section at the end of the application, you would use that area to upload agreements that you might have had with volunteers. You can upload program flyers that prove and demonstrate you have been doing the work in your neighborhood, in your community prior to 2019.
Thanks, Nellie. And I guess I wonder, I'm going to propose perhaps that just so that we don't lose the thread before we dig deep into Alice, that maybe we give Gloria the opportunity for her question in, just so that we can see what if it's related to some of the other threads that we're getting into here.
Great, thank you. It's somewhat related to Alice. We serve students in schools that I know are part of Alice families, but you can't really get that information easily specifically. Is using the percentage of students that are on a school lunch program, would that be part of the calculation, or should I put that in additional information?
I would put that in additional information, but I do know that it often correlates to Alice rates. And I would imagine that some of your services, some of the numbers that you might have talk about the federal poverty levels, et cetera. So you might also be able to use that. We're definitely just using for a percentage of the folks that you serve and interact with each day. So there's a chance that high likelihood that a lot of our organizations, 100% of the constituents that you work with fall below the federal poverty line, or fall, which would also mean that they're at Alice or below. And
Great,
so we're
thank you.
definitely looking at that. In terms of finding your Alice population, am I sharing my screen again? I know
Yes.
I paused it. Great. Do you see yourselves when I share my screen, or you just see the website? So okay, great. Unclear sometimes. So if you go to the county profiles for Michigan, you can select the county. So if you don't know your Alice numbers and this is the first time you're thinking about it, etc. Another way that you can approximate your percentage is if you pull up your county specific profile. So from here, if you look at Wayne County, Alice in Wayne County, 29% of the households here in Wayne County are in Alice. Households in poverty are 18%. So if you serve countywide, you can definitely feel free to combine those numbers and get an approximate, right? But some of our programs are very specific to communities, et cetera. So if you need to, then they get really into, some of the answers, trends over time, which is really great that they have all this data. Then you can also get into specific budget sizes for Wayne County. Again, I set this for Wayne. Why am I scrolling all the way down here for you? Well, because and I think Karen asked this question yesterday, I didn't scroll far enough down was the answer. Because if you go all the way down here to subdivisions within a county, so it's set for Wayne right now. So this is Wayne County pulled out. So then I can segment it. So right now it's set to subdivision, which means this is the city of Detroit. So then you can see here, this is city specific. So 36% of the population here in the city of Detroit, 36 falls. For Alice, 33% is at the property line. So there it is. By subdivision, you can even, if you want to know more about zip code, you can look at it by zip code too. And again, this is set for Wayne County or more granular. So it really depends on how you want to look at the work. If you, how place-based you are in your organization, to think about how you can start pulling together your Alice percentages if you don't currently collect that information.
That's great. Lisa, does that answer your question?
It totally does. That was extremely helpful in terms of where to send folks down the scroll to find that information. That was extremely helpful. Thank you.
Excellent.
It's just a really long website.
Yes, lots of information.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go back to the application, resume share here, you're not looking at your own faces, just me. So we talked a little bit about Alice, we jumped into that. We're asking for your percentages here and services, et cetera, what your organization does. And again, I can move this far. You can hit save and continue editing, or if you still have more, it's not going to let me complete it because I didn't answer the questions. I did not answer the questions. So that's, we talked about qualifications, information, and if you go to funding request now, and this is the, I'd say this is where I would spend my time and attention if I were looking at this application. We ask you, how will you plan on using the grant application itself? So I click restoring financial, you can see the checklist. We just want to make it easy, so just a checklist. And then we're asking for a few narratives here. So how, what kind of steps, what kind of pivots have you and your organization already taken to address COVID-19? Can you talk a little bit about that? We also know, like I mentioned, that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted certain communities that have been marginalized and systemically underrepresented. So we do ask a little bit more about your organization's leadership. And again, please know that no one single factor will disqualify you or your application at all. We're taking a holistic view, but we do have equitable, just as an organization, it's ourselves, M&A. So we are asking you if any of the characteristics here apply to your organization's leaders, your executive directors. We want to know a little bit more about the populations you serve, and if your leadership reflects the populations. So you can either hit previous to go to a previous task, save and continue editing, or mark as complete.
Ellie, I wonder if we could pause, and if folks have questions regarding impact and what constitutes impact, you could take them now. I don't see any in the chat or people's hands raised, but if they have questions regarding impact.
Okay.
It looks like
Oh,
folks are
Miss
clear.
Gloria.
Hi, another
Hi.
question. So we do a lot of programs
Mhm.
out in public and to different
Sure.
organizations, and we had to completely revamp and do everything virtually.
Mm. Yep.
So because of that, we actually had to invest in some equipment and software. Would that
Yeah.
be that was something that I had considered as part of the impact of
Yeah.
COVID? Okay.
So yeah, absolutely. And we hear that a lot. A lot of folks had to really invest in their technology infrastructure, especially the way that they were delivering services. So one of the check marks that you can check here is increasing technology to enable that. And I would definitely consider that pivot that you talk about here. And you can also outline it a little bit more if you want to go into that.
Yep, and it's only 150 words, so I guess I have to be a very succinct when I write.
I know, and you know what? Honestly, that was our fun wording limit. Was a long debate that we had with all of our different committees, because we didn't want it to be arduous for you, the grant applicant, but also and for the reviewer, but also giving us like the space to tell your story. So it was we struggled with setting word limits, I'll be honest with you here. But we decided to have them just so everyone was on the same playing field. But yeah, we weren't sure if we wanted them.
Thank you.
Hi, Lisa.
Nellie, there's a couple more. I'm going to ask folks if they can, Nellie, if she can stay on for 10
Yeah.
or so minutes longer, 15 minutes, and if folks can as well.
Perfect.
This is so helpful. Go ahead, Lisa. You've got some questions in the chat too.
Sure. Just regarding impact, does bringing on temporary staff to pivot to virtual count, like for a communication specialist? I see a head nod. How about buying supplies to convene outdoors, which we ended up doing, so we wouldn't have to meet indoors? And then also, does providing a communication credit for staff working at home, needing to rely on their internet and things like that count? Okay, cool. I see the head nod. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Any other questions regarding impact? I know yesterday we talked about having COVID in your family, having to take care of children so that you didn't have staffing, so you had volunteers and other things like that that incurred cost. But if folks have other questions, please ask or raise your hand or put it in the chat. No, good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does this relate, or what's the consideration for the fact that there were federal funds available also to help with the impact of COVID? Is that a ding against an organization if you did get funds for that? No? Okay.
Not a ding. We are, if you get closer to the end of the application, when we get to the financial disclosures, which I think might actually be close to here. Let's see. We just ask that you share that with us. It's not a ding, but the federal, from the Department of Treasury, it can't be a duplication of funding. So if you ask for funding to cover payroll during the pandemic already, you cannot say that that's one of the reasons that you're asking for funding again, like payroll for the same employees, right? It just can't be a duplication. It doesn't disqualify you at all. We know that lots of aid was giving out, and we encourage you that we hope that you got some if you were able to, absolutely. It just can't be a duplication. Also part of the funding request, it asks you for your region. So again, there's a link to a regional map if you don't know what region we're thinking of when we say mid-state. This just allows us to get your application into the right hands for our place-based reviewers. Again, we do apologize if you had to click not applicable so many times if you don't serve those communities. We're asking you for your current annual operating budget. Again, being really clear about you are welcome to apply for the amount of funding that is proportionate to your need. Absolutely. We're not going to tell you you can only apply for $5, $10, or $25,000. But we will say that just be aware that if you are applying for a certain amount, be aware of the 990 implications that it might have for you and your organization. Be aware of the other implications that it might have for you. We're not saying don't do it. We want you to apply for the amount of money that you need. But just being aware that there might be some 990 guidance you should consider as you think about the funding, think about other issues of compliance. I'm applying for $25,000 for my organization. We're asking you about, again, just a checklist of how it's impacted your organization. The other checklist that you saw was about things that you had to do since then. So here is how impact your organization. So I lost money, financial insecurity. We had to increase costs because we had to pivot to buying stuff for outdoors. We had staffing challenges, volunteer challenges. I'm gonna check it all for that. And then you can talk a little bit more about other information that your organization had to do. So some of the questions that we just got can definitely be addressed here. Impacted or disproportionately impacted populations. You can talk a little bit more about the communities you serve. And then this is where you upload your 990 information. So I'm going to say I have 990s for all 3 years. Check, check, check. Just the postcard filing. And then this is where you would upload that. If for some reason I didn't have a 990 for 2019, I can go here and fill out a revenue and expenses table. And you would do that for any year that you don't have a 994. Again, we're really looking at 2019, 2020, and 2021 in terms of documentation.
I have a question. This is
Yes,
Gloria
please.
again. Regarding 990s, there's our accountant or CPA gives us a public version and
Great.
the private version, which has all of Schedule B, I believe, which is all our donors above a certain amount. Which is the version that you would like uploaded?
Your public version is fine.
All right, thank you.
Excellent.
Looks like I'm still screen. So this is the funding request. We talked about how the grant will be used and how it is impacted. So save and continue. It has lots of errors because I did not complete the answers. I just want to point that out. We talked about funding requests, certification. We're nearing the end of the application. So you got through the hard parts here. We're asking, hey, can we continue to email you? Doesn't impact your eligibility, but we want to know. Someone asked about the disclosure of other federal assistance. Have you requested other funding? Again, it's fine if you have. So if I hit yes, hit yes, then a table appears. And it talks, you'll disclose the name of the grant, how, which department, date awarded, and award amount. So again, it's just about duplication. We're going to ask that you are the right authorized person to sign this, that you are certifying all the information is true, that you are holding us harmless, and then you are safe, or you can mark as complete. And that's the certification section.
Before you move on, Nellie, there's a question in the chat asking if the PPP loan is considered other federal assistance.
Yes. PPP, absolutely. Please disclose that. I know some of them were converted to grants, were converted to loans, or loans were converted to grants. I forget which way it went, but yes, we're asking you to disclose that regardless, and it's in our FAQ as well. Demographic information, I know that folks have to go. We do want to know a little bit more about your organization, what racial groups, if your organization identifies itself as Black-led, Indigenous-led, other POC-led. Again, none of this is scored, but M&A, we're really committed to this idea of upholding a diverse and thriving nonprofit sector. So we do want to know how good we're doing at reaching out to the depth and breadth of Michigan nonprofit organizations. So again, not scored, but it's just a way for us to know that. And then at the bottom here, the section other than demographics, proof of nonprofit status, IRS tax documentation, and optional documentation. These are all places where you would be uploading information. So this is where you would upload your proof of nonprofit status, and there's a button at the bottom where you can do that, where you can upload your W-9 form, and where you can upload any supporting documentation. So I talked a little bit about proof that you had been providing services prior to 2019. This is where you can do that. If for some reason you didn't have your 990 for any of the 3 years and you have supporting documentation to talk about the financial hardships, and here's some examples for that, this is where you would upload that as well. So some sections around uploading, we will be verifying your EIN, so you'll have to enter it again one more time, and then you're done. So let's see. All said, there are 8 sections. 2 of them are just checklists, like check, qualification, certification. 2 of them are a little bit more, tell me about your nonprofit, more just hopefully quick information. And then the funding request is where we ask a little bit more about narrative. Pieces down here are all around demographics, which you can fill out. And the other pieces are around uploading. So I know it looks a little intimidating when you see it. There's like 8 things you have to do. Some of it is uploading documents.
Yeah, Nellie, I think Lisa has her hand up with a question.
Lisa.
Yeah. And then,
Yeah. Thank you. Everyone in our organization is a contractor, and they operate in a staffing, role, so to speak. Are they be considered staff or contractors or both?
They would be considered contractors, and our demographics question asked specifically about 1099 contractors. Let me see if I can find that screen again. So I'm assuming you see my screen again. If you go to demographics, how many are full-time, part-time, volunteers, and then 1099 contractors.
Okay, so if they're considered contractors and they're working the equivalent of full-time FTEs, then they would also be considered as full-time and then contractors?
I would count them as contractors.
Okay, but not full-time.
No, even though, because full-time FTE, I feel like you wouldn't have that 1099 relationship with them.
Well, if they're working in the equivalent of that, in lieu of what would be a full-time FTE,
Yeah.
then
I would still use the 1099 contractor line.
Okay.
And it helps us understand the realities of a lot of our nonprofit partners. The section again is not scored, but it will give us insight into how we can better support you in your work.
Okay, great. And regarding the PPP question, the PPPs, I guess organizations did apply, but a lot of folks were individuals. The question asked about organizations who have received previous support, and there's like really not a place to designate individuals. So I'm a little confused why PPP would be included under that piece. And like, do you query all, and since everyone at our organization would be contractors, it's possible that all of the folks could have applied for PPP support. So do you query everyone for that? And if so, how is that equitable? Because if you are an established nonprofit, any help that they receive, you could have received PPP as individual contractors, but the organization itself didn't, receive any support.
Yeah.
So, that's a little confusing to me.
Okay.
It feels a little inequitable just on its face. I know it's important. I can see how it's important information, but depending on how it's utilized, if it's
right
internal, I get it.
Yeah. Let me verify that information with the compliance team at Leo. Off the cuff, I would say that it's organization that if you're individually applying for PPP, you would not have to disclose that. We're really looking at the organization level because the funding is going to organization level support. But let me verify that for you and get that back to Karen. And we'll also update our FAQ to reflect that because that's a great point. And I want to make sure that I get it right. Excellent.
Thank you, Nelly. And one last question. So there doesn't seem to be any additional requirements or questions regarding, the status of the actual applicant organization that might be fiscally sponsored. And am I understanding that properly? Or are there some other boxes that opened up that applicants might not see? Because in terms of what I'm seeing, most of the fiscal information relates to the fiscal sponsor and not the applicant organization, which is fine. I just make sure there's just no hidden bodies somewhere in this application that haven't been apparent to me and some of the other folks that I know have been looking over the application.
So you're asking what additional documentation you might be needing to do if you are using a fiscal sponsor.
Right, about the applicant organization itself. And you know, I mean, basically is no. I mean, what you see is what you get. Give us what we want, and we're mostly interested in the fiscal sponsors, fiscal condition, and there's not any information about the actual organization's fiscal position that is required.
That is a great question. Let me go to the screen right here. So to your point, if we do ask for a lot of information for your fiscal sponsor, absolutely. So especially around the 990s, right? But I want to say that the wording for the table, and thank you for highlighting that, is if I would use the table here to talk about your organizations or your projects or your programs or financial positioning, if it is separate from your fiscal sponsors, which it is. So that's where I would do that. And we will tighten the language here to make sure that it's clear that this table is what you would fill out as an organization if you are utilizing a fiscal sponsor, that while we do want to see your fiscal sponsor's documentation here, that if you're using a fiscal sponsor, you need to fill this part out. There could be a hidden screen somewhere that talks to that on the fiscal sponsor. If I hit yes somewhere, that for the sake of time, I'm not going to toy around with, but we are asking you to talk about that. Thanks for bringing that up, Lisa.
Sure thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Gloria had a question, one last question, and maybe we can go, if folks don't have any more questions, we can go back to the PowerPoint. Gloria, did you want to ask yours?
Well, yes, I put it in the chat, but we have 1099 contractors, like for, you know, really quick one time, like for people that do speeches for us or things like that. And I don't know if those would be counted as 1099 contractors. Our major 1099 contractor is our outside accountant. So, or do we just should we just focus on the number of Form 1099s that are filed with the IRS?
I would focus on the ones that are actually filed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other questions, if we want to go back to the PowerPoint. And folks can also submit questions afterwards. And so I just wanted to highlight the Build Initiative is providing technical assistance, help. This is not to substitute the great assistance that the Michigan Nonprofit Association is providing, and they have office hours. And I think the link has been put in the chat. This is really to help the grantees of the Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. We are here to help with determining eligibility, drafting impact statements, helping you think through, but also some of the drafting if you need that type of help. And so next slide, please. How do you get that help? Well, please reach out to me, Jennifer Jennings Schaefer, who has been on this webinar. We have another colleague, Erin Arango Escalante, who is available to help. We meet weekly, and if there's any help that you need, we really want to provide that. We do ask that if you reach out to us for help, you do it no later than Wednesday, May 3rd. And that is because we didn't want to get into a situation where we couldn't provide the help. We couldn't provide the drafting in time for the deadline for the grant, which is May 5th at 11:59 p.m. So that's the assistance. And Nellie, did you want to talk about any of the assistance that the Michigan Nonprofit really quickly is providing? I think you had a slide there as well.
I did. Again, if you go to the My Nonprofit Relief, oh, this is the last slide. It's around the impact grant, which we talked about a little bit. But if you go to mynonprofitrelief.org, you'll see a list of our FAQs. So if you have a question that maybe wasn't addressed, some of the questions that you do ask here, we do put into our larger FAQ because we do feel like we want to make sure that it is transparent for everyone. So there's FAQs there, as well as a link to sign up for any of our virtual office hours. We have virtual office hours about twice a week right now from now until May 5th. We even have one on May 5th. Because again, we really want to make sure that you know how to fill out this application. We want to get you all to that completion rate.
we want the same thing. We want all of this money to be taken up, and we want to help Nellie and the Michigan nonprofit go after even more money for nonprofits with the state legislature. So we will send this out in our contact information. We will send the recording as well as this PowerPoint out to you. And again, please reach out to us if you need assistance, particularly the one-on-one assistance with help with drafting. And please reach out to Nellie as well. We will also follow up on the PPP question, Lisa, that you asked. And we truly appreciate all of the work that you do. I want to say a special thanks to Nellie. I don't know anyone who could juggle a 3-year-old and all the other children who are at the center and do it with such ease and walk through such a well, it's not a complicated application, but it has many parts. So thank you so much, Nellie, for all the work that you do and for the Michigan Nonprofit Association. So thank you, everyone.